What if the world's biggest economy does not collapse because it runs out of money? What if it collapses because it ran out of something far more valuable? Right now, the dollar-driven system touches every corner of the earth. Its markets open and the world watches. Its banks move and nations feel the tremor. It has built more wealth, more technology, more military power, and more financial infrastructure than any civilization in human history. And yet, beneath the surface of all that power, something ancient is happening. Something the prophets wrote about. Something every great empire has experienced, right before it disappeared from history forever. There are 7 patterns, 7 sins, not political, not partisan. They are moral, they are spiritual. And according to Scripture, they carry consequences no economic policy can stop. By the end of this video, you will see why financial collapse is often only the last symptom. The real collapse begins somewhere far deeper, in the soul of a nation. This is not a sermon. This is a warning. The first sin does not look like sin at all. It looks like ambition. It looks like innovation. It looks like quarterly earnings reports and stock portfolios and GDP charts climbing year after year. It wears the face of progress, the language of success, and the confidence of a civilization that believes it can always grow its way out of any problem. But there is a moment, historians have noted it in every empire, when the desire for more stops being a drive and becomes a god. Greed disguised as growth does not announce itself. It builds slowly in boardrooms where executives cut worker wages to protect shareholder returns. It builds in systems that reward endless consumption, where a person who saves is seen as naive, and a person who always buys more is seen as thriving. It builds in a culture where enough is never said out loud, because the economy itself depends on people never being satisfied. The ancient warning is precise. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Not money itself, the love of it, the worship of it, the decision to organize an entire civilization around its pursuit without limit, without conscience, without boundary. When growth becomes the only value, everything else, families, communities, creation itself, becomes a resource to be consumed. And a nation that consumes everything around it will eventually begin consuming itself. But this is only the first layer. The second sin is more dangerous because it does not look like destruction, it looks like opportunity. The world's biggest economy runs on borrowed time, literally. The national debt clock rises silently every second, every minute, every hour. A number so large it has stopped feeling real to most people. Consumer debt, corporate debt, government debt stacked upon debt, credit cards, student loans, mortgages stretched across lifetimes. The promise of debt is always the same. Take what you cannot afford today, and tomorrow will be better. But the borrower becomes servant to the lender. That is not a modern financial theory. It is ancient scripture, and it describes exactly what happens when debt becomes the foundation of a civilization rather than a temporary tool. Children are being handed obligations they never agreed to. Families make choices every month between medicine and groceries, between rent and heat, not because they are lazy, but because the system was built in a way that ensures they can never fully catch up. Generation after generation, the burden grows heavier, the chains become more invisible. And the most troubling part is that the whole system is called freedom. Debt addiction does not feel like slavery on day one. It feels like possibility. But by the time a nation recognizes what it has become, breaking free requires a kind of pain most people are not prepared for. The next sin is more dangerous because it does not look evil at first. It looks like policy. When a financial system begins to fail, it does not fail equally for everyone. Inflation rises, prices climb, and the families who can least afford it, the workers, the single mothers, the elderly on fixed incomes, the young people just starting out, they feel every fraction of a percentage point in their bones. They feel it at the grocery store. They feel it at the gas station. They feel it when they look at the cost of housing and realize that something their parents took for granted has become mathematically impossible. Meanwhile, the people who design the system, the people who bet on its instability, the people with enough assets to absorb the shock, they move on. Sometimes they benefit from the very crisis that crushes ordinary families. This is not a conspiracy. It is a moral pattern as old as civilization, and God's concern for the poor, for widows, for workers, for the oppressed, runs like a river through the entirety of Scripture. A nation that allows its weakest members to be crushed beneath the weight of elite financial games does not just have an economic problem, it has a justice problem. And justice delayed at the top always becomes despair at the bottom. The most frightening part is not what is happening to the poor. It is what happens to a nation that stops noticing. The fourth sin is the subtlest. It is the one that a nation calls wisdom, calls protection, calls common sense. It is the moment when a society begins to trust its financial systems the way it once trusted God. The banks glow like temples at night, their glass towers rising above the city skyline, the Federal Reserve, the markets, the reserve currency, the military. These become the armor a civilization wears against uncertainty. And slowly, quietly, the belief forms, we are protected. We are too large to fail. The dollar will hold. The system will correct itself. Our institutions will not let this happen. You cannot serve both God and money. That is not a financial warning. It is a warning about where a soul places its ultimate trust. When a nation's language around money becomes religious, when the markets are spoken of with reverence, when economic growth is treated as salvation, something has shifted at the foundation. Security becomes an idol. And idols, by their very nature, eventually disappoint the people who built them. A nation can look wealthy while quietly becoming bankrupt in its soul. And the fifth sin is the proof. There is a particular kind of danger that hides behind success. It is the danger of institutions that look strong but have been hollowed from within, of financial systems that appear stable while corruption flows through their hidden channels, of leaders who speak the language of service while quietly protecting arrangements that benefit themselves. The image is striking: luxury towers rising over struggling neighborhoods, polished reports and confident press conferences above a foundation quietly turning to rot. A nation can carry the symbols of power and prosperity, the skyscrapers, the military budget, the flag beside rising market charts, while the moral infrastructure beneath them is crumbling. The great empires of history did not all fall to outside enemies first. Many of them decayed from the inside, slowly, over decades. So slowly that the people living through it did not recognize it until the end was already in motion. The sixth sin is what makes that blindness possible. A society in decline does not always look like suffering. Sometimes it looks like a sale. The shopping malls are full. The entertainment is endless. The streaming services multiply. The advertising never stops. New products, new seasons, new distractions, new reasons to want more. And beneath all of it, a civilization growing comfortable, growing soft, growing distracted from the cracks forming beneath its feet. Luxury becomes a sedative. Comfort becomes a form of blindness. And consumerism at its extreme becomes a mechanism that keeps people too busy buying to ask the deeper questions. About where the money comes from, about who bears the cost, about what is actually being built and what is being silently lost. The image that haunts this sin, a society smiling while the foundation cracks beneath it. Crowded malls, empty churches, exhausted workers spending money they do not have on things they do not need to maintain an image that does not satisfy them. And all of this is possible because of the final sin, the one every empire ignores, the one the scripture names with the most gravity. Pride goes before destruction. That is not a metaphor. That is a pattern so consistent across human history that it reads like a law. The world's richest nation on earth does not believe it can fall. Not really. It has too much. It has too many advantages, too much technology, too many financial instruments, too much military power. It is the economy the world trusts. It is too important to the global system to simply collapse. That is exactly what every empire believed. Rome believed it. Babylon believed it. But Babylon believed it. The empires before them believed it. And pride did not merely predict their falls. It was the mechanism. Because pride prevents the kind of honest reckoning that might have allowed correction. Pride stops a nation from looking at its own moral decay and calling it what it is. Pride turns warnings into insults and prophets into enemies. The final warning is always the one the powerful refuse to receive. 7 sins. And not one of them begins with a market crash or a currency failure or a bad interest rate decision. They begin in the heart. They spread through the culture. They corrupt the institutions, burden the families, blind the powerful, crush the weak, and eventually, slowly, painfully, they bring down what no outside force could have toppled alone. Economic collapse is rarely the cause, it is the consequence. It is the visible ending of an invisible collapse that was already complete long before the charts began to fall. This warning does not belong to one nation alone. It belongs to every family that has made money its primary security, to every leader who has confused national power with divine protection, to every person who has quietly let consumption replace purpose, and comfort replace conscience. The scripture does not ask what a nation is worth, it asks what a nation worships. And the most haunting question of our time is not whether the economy will collapse. It is this: what will be left standing when the money is gone? If the only thing a nation ever truly believed in was the money itself,